They'll probably watch it on their digital eyeglasses. And they'll see a story of a state called Ohio that went from bicycles to hybrid vehicles, that went from auto glass to solar panels, that went from steel to wind turbines, that went from corn and cellulose to ethanol, that went from tires to polymers, that went from gliders to turbine engines and lunar rockets at NASA Glenn. It went from trim components for appliances to flow plates for fuel cells, that went from using carbon for making electrodes in steel arc furnaces to carbon for heat management in our laptops, in our cell phones. The story that our children will see on their digital eyeglasses is that we seized the moment. We transformed the future. And we linked and leveraged our inventive past with an even more innovative future. During this past election year, Ohio was probably the most analyzed bellwether state in the nation. Much of that reporting, understandably, focused on our manufacturing job losses, overlooking, unfortunately, major investments and advancements. Tax reform, manufacturing productivity, technological innovation, emerging industries, and higher education. Between 1997 and 2007, manufacturing experienced a loss of 254,000 jobs. But flip the other side of the coin. There were employment gains in the professional, health, and education sectors of 267,000 jobs. And while manufacturing employment declined, productivity went up 11%. Ohio simply has too many strengths, too many successes, too much talent, too noble a history to be pigeonholed as the poster child for our nation's economic woes. Look under Ohio's hood, and you will see an engine that we are retooling. We are aggressively changing the trajectory of Ohio's economy. Now, the world is coming at us at lightning speed. We know that. There are more kids who will take the SAT in English this year who live in China than who live in the United States of America. The world's tallest buildings are in Taipei and Dubai. The largest publicly traded company in the world is in Beijing. And the largest passenger airplane is built in Europe. Google is now processing about 1 billion searches a day, up from 150 million just 3 years ago. If Ohio were a separate country, we would be the 25th largest country in the world. But Peggy's and my daughter, Jessica, visits another country every afternoon that is larger than the state of Ohio. It's a website called MySpace. If MySpace were a separate country, it would be the 11th largest country in the world. There will be more text messages sent throughout the world today, and if this speech is boring, perhaps even during this speech, there will be more text messages sent throughout the world today than there are people on the planet. And here's a fact that only Peggy Zone Fisher knows. 42% of those text messages will have been sent by our daughter, Jessica. When our son, Jason, graduated from college a few years ago, Peggy and I sat down with him and said, "What do you want to do with your life?" Most parents have asked that question at one time of their child when they graduate from high school or college, and he said something to us I would never in a million years would have thought to say to my mom and dad, but he was dead serious. He said, "Mom, Dad, what I want to do hasn't been invented yet." But think about it. It's a paradigm shift. Today we are training and educating men and women for jobs that do not yet exist using technologies that have not yet been invented to solve problems that none of us in this room, even Dick Pogue, know are problems. The employment shift has been dramatic. In the past 20 years, the nation's net growth resulted from firms less than 5 years old. Think of it. Take a look at the 1980 Fortune 100 list. 75% of those companies, gone. 75% gone. 1995, the two top employers in Ohio, Ford and General Motors. Today, among our top employers, primarily health and education. Cleveland Clinic, University Hospital are among the top 5 employers in the state of Ohio. So what's this all mean? Well, Governor Strickland and I made a two-part promise when we were elected. First, live within your means, and second, invest in what matters. We do believe that you must do more with less, but we do not think that is in conflict with doing more for those who have less. We think if you're strategic, you can do both. Now, the first time since the personal income tax was enacted, we are projecting a 3-year decline in revenue. The first time since 1950, we're projecting a 2-year decline in sales tax revenue. The first time in a half century, our general revenues have declined 2 years in a row. And we are projecting at this moment the largest deficit in Ohio history, $7.3 billion, and we can trace virtually all of it back to the fall of Lehman Brothers on September 15th and what has happened in the world since that day. What was our response? Our response was to pass the slowest growth state budget in 42 years. Our response when we saw the economic perfect storm headed to Ohio and that even the slow growth budget was not enough was to cut an additional $1.9 billion from our budget. We have 3,000 less state employees today than when Governor Strickland and I took office. We have put together a government accountability plan that is streamlining and taking a look at every agency, every rule, every regulation, and turning it upside down to make sure to determine whether it should even exist, and if it does, to make it simple and less expensive. In our current budget, which the governor just introduced, most programs are getting cuts but between 10 and 20%, and consolidating support services for most agencies and for 28 boards and commissions. But here's the thing. I don't know any respected economist in the world who believes that you can cut your way to prosperity. Which leads me to the second part of our promise and what the debate in Washington, D.C. as we speak is all about. It's about investing in what matters. We are operating today in Ohio on 3 parallel levels with regard to our economic development. The first is blocking and tackling. The second are the long yardage passes of immediate investments. And the third, planning for future seasons by having a strategic roadmap that takes us far out into the future. And we do these things all at the same time. In the last 2 years, we have funded more than 3,600 economic and community development projects in the state of Ohio. We've leveraged more than $14 billion in non-state funds, mainly private investment. We've created more than 53,000 jobs. We've retained close to 200,000 jobs, and we've trained close to 100,000 workers. In our pipeline today, we have 800 economic development projects, and if all of those are successful, and most will be, we will leverage an additional $14 billion in private funds. Every one of our successes is the result of a partnership, a collaboration. Partnerships with Mayor Frank Jackson, with our 3 county commissioners, with the Port Authority, with Team NEO, with the Greater Cleveland Partnership, with the Fund for the Economic Future, for Jumpstart and BioEnterprise, and Nortec and Magnet, CSU and Case Western Reserve University, the North Coast Angel Fund, the Global Cardiovascular Innovation Center at the clinic, the Ohio Aerospace Institute, the list goes on, and without them and without us, most of these successes simply could not and would not have occurred. So where does that take us? Well, it means that we are moving down the field, but because of what's happened since September 15th, before September 15th, we would gain 5 yards and maybe lose 1 or 2, but keep moving down the field. But now, because of what's happened since September 15th, often the losses exceed the yardage.